So there's been an evolution of vulnerabilities, which gets us into talking about information assurance. We used to worry about accessing physical securities when computers first came about. Does anybody remember mainframes? Anybody work with mainframes? Well, if you did or do, you know that access, at least in the early days, was physical, right? You had to have a key, and you type it in, you get in. There was a list of people who could access these physical computers, and only those people. So if something went wrong, you kind of knew who to look for. Then we started to spread computing out on people's desks. And eventually we started to wire these systems into mainframes. And not too long after that, we started to proliferate computing everywhere. And so what used to be behind locked doors is now spread out everywhere. And every one of those nodes in the network, every wire, is a potential place for intrusion, bad behavior. And we did this without thinking. So we've taken in the past a castle approach. You folks have castles everywhere here. So castles think about defense in depth. So you have several moats, right? Alligators in some, and drawbridges and things like that. So you have several mechanisms that keep the bad guys out. We talked in the early days of perimeter defense, firewalls. Everybody knows about firewalls. Then we talked about layered defense, the castle approach, where you'd have intrusion detection systems. So once you got inside, you'd be detected, etc. But these aren't working anymore. So we're at a very interesting place with cybersecurity. We're having to rethink the paradigm. You might as well assume they're going to get in. In fact, that same gentleman, the Chief Information Security Officer for the University of Washington, is now talking about a strategy for IA professionals called assumption of breach. I actually heard them say this at the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. at a conference a couple of months ago. That was interesting because Kirk's words are coming back. You would never have heard them talk about this and admit that you have to assume breach. You have to assume the enemy's within. A very different problem of detection. And so what you're seeing right now is a lot of research being done about different ways of conceptualizing an architecture that assumes breach. I should also tell you, in that little diagram that showed the local area network, there are some things that you assume, even if those systems worked 100%, kept everybody out, you still have that messy human factor. And we haven't re-engineered the human being from time immemorial. So if you put in those firewalls and intrusion detection systems, even in the old days, you were assuming that all of those designs met the goals that you were establishing for security in your organization, and that the sum total together met all of your goals. You also made this assumption that implementation was correct. Now, how many of you downloaded software from the internet or installed software on your machines and got it right the first time? How many of you loaded software on your machines and you've used it and it's been configured wrongly for quite a while? How perfect do we think our IT people are that we rely on? They're good people, but how perfect are they? They're human beings. So you're making some interesting assumptions about these tools that we expect to protect us, that they're implemented correctly, that they're installed correctly, and that they're administered correctly. Our friend Julie Amaro in Connecticut certainly was a victim of this. The systems weren't patched. They weren't maintained properly. That was the least of her problems. So this is the bottom line. If you walk out of this lecture thinking and remembering anything, it's this. You will never own a perfectly secure system. This is too complicated. There's too many moving parts and too many pieces. So what this means to you is that you have to be a savvy user. There's things that you can do as a user to make it more safe and palatable online. But there's definitely things that we need to institutionalize as organizations. And here's the opportunity for you, because this is an emerging field. And for those of you who are going into records management, librarian science, this is an emerging area you might like to think about adding to your toolkit.